Yeah, Joe,
to move the lieutenant up in the agenda so that he could give his report and get back to his duties. And there was he mentioned, yeah, I do have to get back because there's been an incident I have to respond to. And that turned out to be a fatal hit and run motorcycle accident. And I just wanted to point that out, that we were sitting here when that incident occurred. And it left an impact on me, and I hope we all appreciate how important the work that we're doing here is. That was it.
So, all right, let's do a roll call. We'll start with you, Joe, just so everybody, because I know I, for one, don't remember everybody's names, and I can't see the name tags from this angle. So we'll start with Joe. Joe
Uhas here.
Us.
Jim Farley here.
Jay Bieber here.
Jay Bieber, Tom Callow.
Ed Hermes here. Had a couple questions earlier about how to pronounce it. It's Hermes, like rhymes with thermos.
Jamie Trufus.
Michael Jones. Michael Jones.
Michael O.
Yeah.
I have a hard time with when you're speaking into these things.
Abby Tomich.
And I knew that, Abby. Okay, first item of agenda is a discussion and possible action on the minutes of the December 14th meeting. Does anybody have any comments or questions about the minutes? Yes, Laura. I don't have the minutes in front of me, so.
I'm looking at them here. What are we looking for?
Item number 5.
Promotion
Page 5, she said.
to approve the proposal. Oh, okay. There was unknown mention to approve. Oh, I don't remember who. Does anybody remember making the motion? I seconded it. I believe it came from this side. I don't know who it was though.
I don't know. Need to know? Yeah, leave it unknown.
And Dan, do you hear us, Dan?
Yeah, I can hear you. I was having a little bit of problems, but I can hear you now.
I just want to note Dan Penton is here too for the minutes.
Okay. Again, any discussion? Anybody have any questions, comments on the minutes? Hearing none, would anyone like to make a motion to approve the minutes?
So
I-
moved.
I second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Same. Okay, the motion carries. Now we will have the director's update. Joe, the floor is yours.
Yeah, Chair Callow and members of the committee, I want to thank you again for taking the personal time to do this very important effort. And I'm looking forward to my second meeting here. Also want to thank my staff and Brianna, Carl, Sasha, Greg, Laura, who put a lot of effort into doing this. We have 223 positions to fill in the department, and a couple of those key positions are in Laura's position, so they're stretched pretty thin these days. We do intend to fill those, but we rely heavily on her and Terry and others to really keep the department running and the communication going. So thank you for putting this together. And Heather, I know there's other staff here that's sitting here. I want to thank all of them for taking part. I will say, I know we were supposed to have a meeting today with a few people from this crowd regarding NACTO, National Association of City Transportation Officials, and or it might be North American. I forget if it's national or it is. So a good friend of mine, Elliot Sander, who's also a mentor of mine, created that organization, and we do intend to get more involved. That was one of my key things coming into this. I was very frustrated in my last job in Suffolk County, Long Island, a county of 1.6 million people, that they wouldn't allow counties to join, and I voiced that concern to them because there's a lot of fatalities going on outside of the big cities. So I'm very happy now to be in a position where we can join that organization, and have had discussions with many of the directors, San Diego, Atlanta, and already. So that's a very positive thing. Going forward, it's very important to me. We're going to be very data driven. The fatality numbers over 200 a year and in our system in Phoenix are numbers we want to drive down. They've gone up and they've kind of gone up universally around the country during COVID. There's a lot of other factors at play that have to be sorted out that people are trying to figure out. So, we are going to be very data driven and focus on those areas where we think we can make the most difference. And to some extent, that's already happened. $25 million grant that we got for Safe Streets for All for Indian School Road, which is a corridor, an arterial that's got a lot of fatalities and serious injuries. So that's a very positive thing between planning, design, construction. That money is going to go for. So I've heard a lot from you, and I'll continue to show up at events and listen and collect as much information as possible. I can't promise you anything, but except that I'll do my best to drive down fatalities. I was involved with a program. I led a program on Long Island where we reduced fatalities by 100 people per year prior to COVID. Some of those numbers have gone up a little bit. So we are looking to do not a situation that's perfect for Long Island, a situation that's perfect for Phoenix and what works best here. So Brianna and I have talked about this a lot, and staff, and how do we go forward working with your organization here and the committee here and the city management to attempt to make a difference in the future. And those are important numbers. I mean, even if you reduce the numbers by 10 people per year that pass away on our system, that's 10 people per year. That's a change that you've made that will go on forever, or until 25, 50 years from now, when the entire system is automated and we're no longer driving cars, which is how long the experts think it'll be before we get to that situation. So I'm still learning. I'm a cyclist. I've been out riding a lot of roads. If you got a particular route that you want me to see, let me know. We'll go tour it. And I'm told it's going to take about 3 or 4 years for me to get to every facility that we have, but we've already made a big dent in that. So thanks again, and I'm looking forward to working with all of you.
Thank you, Joe. You made a comment that it sounded to me like the city is not a member of NACTO now. Is that correct?
No, we are. They just weren't as active before.
Oh, okay.
And the leadership at NACTO made me aware of that when I was coming here, and had asked, that change. And having been frustrated working in suburban New York with 3 million people, we weren't allowed to join. Counties weren't allowed to join. I've already brought that to their attention, and they vowed to make some sort of change to be universal and let more people in. It was interesting talking to the director in Atlanta. He says, people are dying on the roads, but they're not dying on his roads. They're dying on the roads going to and from Atlanta. Atlanta's only, like 500,000 people. So it needs to be really a universal approach. We need to work with everybody. We need to work with people in Scottsdale and elsewhere to see what we can do combined, not just in our own jurisdictions, to drive down fatalities.
When I was director, which has been many moons ago, we were not a member. Phoenix was not a member, but at the time they only allowed, I think it was 5 cities to be members of NACTO, and we were the first city outside of that original 5 to join. And it wasn't a very big organization at the time. Obviously, if you had 6 cities in it, so I was just curious if it. And the second thing, you have 220 something vacancies. I presume a lot of those are field vacancies because that was always a problem.
They are, but they're across the board. We have a lot of vacancies in our traffic engineering ranks as well. So, which is a big focus of ours. It's really across the board. There's some areas where we have a higher fill percentage than others, and as you can imagine, it's difficult to get people in at some of the salaries we have, and especially maintaining our signals. Those are really electricians, but they're not paid like electricians. So we're working already on starting up some apprenticeships to try to get more people on board.
Does anyone else have any questions?
Yeah. First of all, Director Brown, really appreciate everything you've done so far. I know you've I'm sure it feels like drinking out of a fire hose at some moments, but I can just say from personal experience, I've seen you out about showing up in the community at meetings and whatnot. And I can just tell you really are leaning into it. And I really appreciate your commitment to Vision Zero and just everything you've already been doing to get out in the community. Phoenix is a big city. It's a diverse city. There's a lot. And I'm sure there's a lot of people that are wanting to bend your ear. And I think you're doing a great job getting out there, getting out and about. And so thank you for that. It's one of those things that you mentioned vacancies, and just keep me apprised. I know it takes time. This is 200 plus vacancies. One really important position to me personally is the Safe Routes to School director or coordinator, whatever you call that position. Don Cross used to be in that position. Some of you might remember him. Fantastic person. I know he retired and left the city, but did a lot to coordinate with school districts, including the school district that I serve, Osborne School District. And I've seen what that position can do to really bridge that gap with schools and make our schools safer and push safe routes to school. So if there's anything, would love to know kind of where we're at filling that position. If there's anything I can do to help, would love to do that.
Chair Callow and members of the committee, thank you, Ed. We are already working on that, and Brianna had already submitted something to me, reallocating a position so that we could fill that position soon. It's not easy in the civil service ranks. Half of the people leave in the first 2 years, so if we have to bring on 223, we might have to bring on double that, and it's not going to happen overnight, and then we're going to have some attrition in the meantime. So to get to that number, it might be 500 people in 5 years. So it's not an easy task. So we are starting this process.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, go ahead. Who's that? Is that you, Joe? Dan, go ahead. I'm Joe. I'm sorry.
I assume that that the surrounding communities are facing the same challenges.
Excuse me?
I assume in terms of staffing, our neighbors are facing the same challenges.
Yes, they are. And the class and comp adjustment helped us be a little more competitive with them. And now they're making some more adjustments to get higher salaries than ours. So we are continue to make adjustments for things that after the class and comp study that need to be further adjusted.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Again, welcome. And I have just a couple of questions and comments. You mentioned being data-driven, and that's really nice to hear because that's something that we really want to see in making decisions to make sure that we have the data, but also drill down into the data as far as we can get to really pinpoint where certain problems lie. And I'll just give an example of that, which is you mentioned that we've seen an increase in fatalities. So the question is, if it's an increase of fatalities, if it's pedestrians, bicyclists, other drivers, whatever. But then within that, where is the increase coming from? Is it distraction? Is it something else? So if we can dig down as far as possible to just simply saying, well, we've had an increase in pedestrians doesn't always help in terms of being able to pinpoint things. So I'm not saying you're doing that, but I'm just making as a general comment about that.
Yeah, Chair Callow and members of the committee, and I think thanks for that question. That's something that even Brianna and I talked about today. There's a lot of other factors at play, so just total numbers doesn't tell you the whole story. There's a lot. Around the country, there's been a spike during COVID, and a lot of people are making guesses as to why that is. A little different driving habits, and people maybe with less patience. We're not really sure. But a lot of people have made those comments, and that's around the country. But, when you see a number from 10 years ago in Phoenix versus now, the city's grown considerably in the last 10 years. So it has to be really put into context. Is that per person on the road? New York City, when they expanded their bike ped system significantly in the last 10 years, they had a big spike in bike and ped injuries and fatalities. But per user, I'm not sure it was going up because they had such a large growth in the number of people that were using that system. So everything has to sort of be taken into context, and we're going to do our best job as possible to sort of look at all of those factors in the equation.
It's really hard, especially with bike and ped to be able to measure exposure, because it's very hard to count. But just as an example, I just came back from in January. We went to the TRB conference, and I saw two different presentations. One presentation said that, a lot of the pedestrian fatalities have been driven by distractions, cell phones, and things like that, and larger vehicles. And then I saw another one that said, no, that's not the case. So it's really hard to dig down into all this. So it's a challenge, but it's great to see that the city is approaching it as best as they can. Thank you.
Thanks. And I was disappointed to miss TRB this year. I presented there a couple times, so I have a lot of good friends, including a chief engineer at New York City DOT that was wondering why I wasn't there. But
it was a
we
good
attend to be
conference. Well,
more
you're here now, so you
there
can't
in the
just
future.
come down the coast and take the train.
And the reality is both of them might have been true, depending on where they're coming from, right? Those two reports that you saw.
Any other questions? All right, Joe, thank you for the update. We will move on to Vision Zero Awareness Campaign. Senators Sexer Perez and Greg Bach. Joe, do you want to say anything? Brianna, you want to say anything to kick it off? So that out there is a question. Okay.
Chair Callow, members of the committee, good evening. My name's Sasha Bettis. I'm the Special Projects Administrator who oversees the Communication and Public Engagement team in the Street Transportation Department. And with me today is Greg Bach, our Senior Public Information Officer, who is also part of the Communication team. Tonight, Greg and I will share information and data related to past and future safety education campaigns. We'll share information on potential yard sign pilot programs, gather input from the committee, and take questions and comments afterwards. To start us off, I'll send it over to Greg.
Thank you, Sasha. Good evening, Chair Callow and committee members. Pleased to be here tonight to share with you some information about the department's road safety education efforts that we've worked through over the last couple of years. In dating back to 2020, the department developed a tagline that we added to our safety messaging. It's the scan the street for wheels and feet. It has an English and Spanish component to it. And so that tagline accompanies a variety of different safety messaging that we put out there. Guidelines, tips, a whole variety of different messaging that's related to all users of the roadway. So that consisted of a series of animated videos. We have 15 and 30-second versions of those videos. Those were created by Phoenix TV. They live on their YouTube channel as well as on our road safety website, which is Phoenix.gov/road safety. And then in the time since those have been created, they've been shared in different ways on our social media platforms, etc. And so I would like to play for you two versions of those.
Todos queremos llegar a nuestros destinos de maneras.
We all want to get to our destination safely, so be aware of everything happening around you whenever walking, riding, or rolling along our streets. Most pedestrian and bike crashes happen when drivers are turning. Scan the street for wheels and feet when turning or entering intersections.
And so that was one of the English versions of those. And I should have mentioned as well that we have four different versions. We have a general safety message, which was the one that we just played there. There's one about intersections, one about crosswalks, and another that highlights stop on red lights at Hawks, red lights at railroad crossings, and stop signs, of course. And then here's a Spanish version of that one that we just played.
Todos queremos llegar a nuestros destinos de manera segura, así que esté atento a todo lo que sucede a su alrededor cuando camine, monte bicicletas o maneje por nuestras calles. La mayoría de los choques de peatones y bicicletas ocurren cuando los conductores de vehículos están girando. Preste atención a los automóviles y a la gente en las calles.
And so you saw on those ads tagged at the end there were sponsored by the Governor's Office of Highway Safety in the city of Phoenix. So going to 2023, we used a grant from GOHS, a $100,000 grant, to help with a pair of paid media advertising campaigns. And so we worked with Reister. They're a national ad agency. They have headquarters here locally in Phoenix. And we ran a 3-month campaign, January through March of 2023. that we spent $100,000 on, and that got us about 14.5 million plus impressions. In a moment, we'll take a closer look at what we did and what how some of those metrics break down. And then we did a second version, a campaign that ran from October through the middle of November of 2023. We had a little bit of money left in that grant, $18,000 there that you see, and then that got us not quite 2 million or so impressions. So taking a closer look at this, the 3-month campaign that ran at the beginning of 2023, whoops, I went ahead too far there. We had various different platforms that this campaign ran on that Scan the Street for Wheels and Feet messaging. And so part of that involved traffic, 10-second spots on traffic radio reads. So if you listen to KTR in the morning and you hear Detour Dan every 6 or 8 minutes, do a traffic update at the end, it's tagged with an ad. And so we had a safety message ad tagged at the end of that. So during those 3 months, that aired on KTAR as well as on the Total Traffic News Network, which has a variety of different terrestrial stations here that are part of that around the valley. So that got us about a little over 3 million impressions. And between those, the network and KTAR, we had 444 of those spots that ran during those 3 months. And I should point out too, during those 3 months, that was a time of year where we see an uptick in visitors here in town with winter visitors. We also had Super Bowl, spring training, et cetera, going on during that time as well. So that was a little bit of the logic that went into that. Another aspect for that 3-month campaign was social media. We did targeted sponsored ads on Facebook, and you see 2 examples of what those ads look like there on your screen. A little over 3 million impressions out of those posts, and about 16,000 clicks. And so the clicks were, if somebody were to see that ad on Facebook, that post, and click on it, then it would take them to our road safety webpage, that Phoenix.gov road safety page that I shared before. And then I should note too, I know I mentioned this, but these were, we also had Spanish versions of these. So all of this campaign had English and Spanish aspect to it. And the radio reads as well aired on a couple of Spanish language stations, radio stations here in town as well. And then YouTube. So we had those, the 15-second videos that I played earlier. The 4 different versions that we have aired as pre-roll ads on YouTube. I'm sure you've all experienced those and know what that looks like when that ad pops up at the beginning. And so that resulted in about 1.7 million impressions, a little over 1,000 clicks. Again, clicking on it would take you to our road safety page where all of those videos are posted and additional resources are available. And a view rate here, which just is something I really want to point out, is the 37.6% view rate. A good average view rate for these ads is 10 to 15%. Reister, the ad firm that we were working with, their target for our campaign was around 30%. So we exceeded that. So this was something that we were pleased to see, and I think points out that we got some good mileage out of our dollars there for that. And then the last piece of the campaign is Google Digital Display Network. And so you see the ads that are on there that we clipped on there. So these would appear on a variety of websites. It could be AZ Central, you could be on a site where you're shopping for clothes, anything. And these would be orientated on the banners or down the side. And if you clicked on those, then it takes you to our road safety page. Over 6 million impressions on that and 4,400 plus clicks. And again, clicking on that would take you to that page. So that's those are some of the metrics from that January through March portion of the campaign from last year. And now looking ahead to we did the October through November, the 6 weeks I mentioned. And so we had used the data from the earlier campaign to knowing that we had, the 18 grand and figuring out what we thought we could get the most out of for those 6 weeks. And so we went back and we did the traffic radio spots on KTAR for those 6 weeks. That resulted in 96 spots. And you see on there, they're the 10-second live reads. And those, similar to the first campaign, ran Monday through Friday, and from 5 a.m. to 7 p.m. So while you're hearing the more frequent traffic spots during those morning drive time, those 3 or 4 hours during morning and evening drive, they do traffic updates throughout the day as well too, just not as frequently. So some of those ads would have also aired on some of those spots. And then we did a bit with the Google Display Network and with YouTube, again, with those ads. And so that resulted in a little over 1 million impressions and a view rate there again of 32.5. So we again exceeded that target from the ad firm of 30%. So that's just a look at what we've done, what we did this past year. We are in the process now of planning ahead for 2024. We have more money from GOHS this year from a grant, $100,000 again, and we're also using $250,000 out of the Road Safety Action Plan Fund that Council approved when they approved that plan back in 2022. So a $350,000 campaign. We're again working with Reister on putting that together, looking at using some of the similar platforms that we did this last year for the paid media advertising buys on there, refreshing the series of videos that we did, the video that I shared, and then also looking at maybe expanding that into a couple of other versions, maybe to potentially hit on bicycle safety, to hit on speeding, and possibly a couple of other options. And then something that we heard the committee a couple of months ago bring this up, and something that we want to build into this campaign, into the Scan the Street for Wheels campaign, is the yard sign pilot program, and seeing how we can add that, and maybe it's a way that we can get community buy-in, we can get people committed to the message and stuff that we're sending out. And so I will turn it over to Sasha to talk with you more about that. Thank you.
Here we go. So staff heard the request and recommendation from the committee to explore the implementation of a Vision Zero yard sign pilot program. So as a starting point, we wanted to look at what other cities around the country are currently doing in regards to yard signs. So Portland, Oregon's Vision Zero yard sign program is currently free to the public. They have 3 designs, but all three of those designs on one side will say slow down, set the pace. The other 3 traffic safety messages that they have available are look for kids and seniors, stop for people crossing, watch for people biking. The signs are available in person for pickup only at Portland City Hall. Residents can request 1 sign per household, and they can do so via Portland's yard sign program webpage. Portland also provides pins and stickers and brochures with some of their slogans on them by request. Staff also reached out to the city of Seattle, Washington. Seattle's Vision Zero yard sign program is also free. The 2 signs you see here are their current yard sign design. However, they have had past designs with slogans like 20 is plenty and keep kids safe. They are also available in person for pickup only, and they also use an online form to make requests for pickup. Seattle partners with their city, community, and customer service centers that also act as distribution sites for residents and stakeholders to pick up signs. Something that their program manager mentioned to me when we spoke was that he suggested cities that are starting new programs that they should start small. They've only been able to distribute a couple of hundred signs in a couple of years. So. And then another city we took a look at was Cincinnati, Ohio. Similar to the other cities, their program is free to the public. Currently, they have these 2 designs here available. Residents and businesses can request signs via an online form. Something unique about Cincinnati is that they allow residents and businesses to apply to be distribution centers. Another unique thing about them is that their program is run and funded by a nonprofit 501c3. Devu Good Foundation is who consults with the city on where those locations should be for sign pickup. But that program manager mentioned to me that they found better success in their program by partnering with local bookstores and places that act as hubs for the neighborhoods. And so given the success of our previous safety campaign messaging that Greg talked about, and taking into consideration what other cities have experienced with their sign program, staff came up with some recommendations and draft designs for the committee to take a look at and provide input on. My talented assistant here is going to hold up some sample signs as we walk through some of these. So our program will, of course, be free to the public. All signs will be available in English and Spanish. A request process will also be available via our Road Safety Action Plan webpage, but we'll also partner with our Parks and Recreation Department community centers in various areas of the city, and they'll act as distribution sites in addition to City Hall. And as an added layer of engagement, we'd also like to provide flyers of whatever signs or slogans that we choose. We'll provide these flyers to businesses and stakeholders. For example, we have a list of bike organizations that we'd reach out to and provide the flyer for them to put maybe in a coffee shop, maybe in, maybe it's Landis Cyclery, maybe it's some of the smaller shops that they'd like to help us get the messaging out. Something we found really helpful over the past year is partnering with our school districts. So this year we distributed over 2,500 pedestrian safety activity books to schools in Phoenix. And so we'd like to partner again with those schools and distribute whichever sign sample we use. We'd like to get that out to some of the schools and into yards near and around school districts. So that's something we're pretty excited about. And then here, this is the third design option we wanted to provide in a grayscale. And we want you to know that these signs, we are not married to the colors. We're not married to the wording. We're looking for you really here to give input on a final product. So we'd love to hear your feedback at the end of the presentation. As far as funding goes, staff is proposing a one-year pilot program estimated at about $30,000. This cost will include design time, fabrication, and then the hardware or stakes, if you will, that go into the yards. We'll fabricate about 2,500 signs that will be approximately 24 by 18 in size. So this size that you see here is what the actual sign will look at if that's the size that we decide to go with. Funding is currently available in the Roadway Safety Action Plan Fund. And depending on the quantity of what our first order will be, we could probably get out a few hundred signs and make them available by March 1st. And that brings us to our recommendation, which is we request guidance and input from the Vision Zero Community Advisory Committee regarding consideration, implementation, design, and funding for the Vision Zero Yard Sign Pilot Program.
Thank you very much. That was a very informative little presentation there you had. Comments, Ed?
Yeah, I'd like to take you up on that offer for feedback and all of this in the most positive and constructive of way. And thank you so much. And I know this is something that I had emailed about, and I think Abby had brought up as well about doing this, especially the yard sign piece, which I'm really excited about. And just speaking from on behalf of the Osborne School District, I've already spoken with our board and our superintendent. Would love to, help get these out there in the neighborhood. I took this to my local neighborhood association meeting and talked to others about this. Just from a design standpoint, and got some feedback from it, and which I agree with. One, really good to have the Vision Zero branding on it. I see in other cities like Seattle, Cincinnati, I think they all had the Vision Zero branding on it. I didn't necessarily see that in ours. Would love to see that on all of our things, our yard signs specifically. And then the scan the streets for yards and feet, or sorry, wheels and feet. Apologies. I'll be honest with you. I don't love it. I really don't. I think some of the other Vision Zero committees or in other places in other states have done their slogans. All due respect to everyone, who has been involved. I think this might be a good opportunity to pivot and do something a little bit more pithy, understandable. I really like what some of these other states are doing, like Seattle, and I printed a couple off, and you had some good examples too, like this one that says "Look out for each other," and it's got the Vision Zero branding on it. I just think that I don't know, as a person, I'd rather see something like that in my yard, in English or Spanish. And I really like the 20 is plenty, which is a really good one. Especially we were talking about yard signs. These are going into presumably mostly neighborhoods like mine, where kids are out running around, people on their bicycles. And really 20 is plenty in those areas. So I'd like to see a different slogan than "Scan the street for wheels and feet," something that's a little bit punchier.
No, that's great feedback. And I'd love to take those signs with me if I could. And as far as the Vision Zero logo goes, we are actually working on one. You'll see on some of these, we have the word logo because we are currently working on a Vision Zero logo. So we'll bring that back to the committee once we have some mock-ups for you guys to look at. But
Thank
great
you.
I had a
feedback. Thank
comment.
you.
I had a comment.
Is that Dan?
Yep, sure.
Yeah, go ahead.
Hi. So thanks for the presentation. That was great. I think I echo what Ed's comments. My personal experience with the scan the wheels for wheels and scan the street for wheels and feet, it's hard to say. First off, but I just thought it lacked anything that would really catch my attention. You know, I think there's some cities out there that have put out some campaigns that have created controversy because they've just shocked the conscience about what they were showing, like people getting hit by, I don't necessarily want to do anything like that, but something that's a little bit more vibrant, more, stand out, that stands out and grabs people's attention. To say, hey, because that's what we're trying to do. We don't want them to take their eyes off the road, but, for a quick glimpse, like the 20 is plenty. I know LA Metro has recently done a really successful road safety campaign. Basically, every lane is the bike lane. Stuff for watching, scanning the, I can send a couple of these posters that I have since I'm not there with you guys, obviously, and then maybe somebody can send them out to the committee. But watch it on the streets. There's got a person, silhouette of a lady with a stroller, and in a crosswalk. Just there's other things out there, but I really support this. I think in Levine, especially in other areas of District 7, this would be a beneficial campaign, because citywide, but my own experience, it's dangerous, and so anything that can kind of help get that message out there to slow people down, or make them more aware of their surroundings is definitely a positive. So I look forward to seeing this campaign come to fruition, and I'll be happy to send some of those posters over for your people to look at.
Okay, Dan, other questions? Tim had his hand up first, and then I'll get back to you, Jaime.
Yeah, we were speaking of data and metrics earlier. What are going to be the things we're looking at to see how effective this program is?
Well, I think using the Parks and Recreation community centers as distribution sites and making sure that we take data on how many households are coming and picking up those signs. So that's one thing, how many households are actually using the signs. I think another thing is being able to keep track of how the signs hold up, and especially in our type of weather, how they're holding up, if they're even being used, if we see them on the side of the road, if we, that sort of thing. But I think really just making sure we kind of try to keep as best track as we can on how many households are actually making use of them. And then not just our residents, but also our stakeholders, our bike community, some of those local hubs that we'd like to reach out to, and even the school districts, kind of trying to keep track of how many folks are actually using them.
That would be great, as far as determining how effective we are at getting the signs and all of that out there. But what's going to be the measurement we're looking for in terms of a reduction in accidents, fatalities, what our ultimate goal is with Vision Zero?
I can answer that question. So Director Callow and members of the committee, education campaigns are, can you not hear me? Okay, so education campaigns of any sort, no matter what the city, it's hard to determine exactly their impact for them. You can look up a lot of different research projects, and none of them necessarily can pinpoint exactly. Our overall goal is to reduce fatalities, and the more we get just the message out to pay attention to what you're doing, whether or not you're walking across the street, whether you're driving, whether you're biking, whatever, that is something that we want to try to do. It is a small overall portion of our overall funds for it, and something good to do. But as far as measurement, we're always looking at all of our data year by year by year to see, but it's hard education directly. It's hard to directly measure what that is.
I agree with Dan and Ed's point about the just look of it. I don't know if we've reached out to to the art community. We have a great art community that we could reach out to and work with to see if they can come up with something unique. My other second point is with the signs. I just feel like they're a little short. I don't know if it's possible we can make it a little bit higher up for car visibility. Because if you're driving, you're not going to see those signs. If you can barely see a kid walking down the street, you're not going to see a sign. So I'd love to see that be able a little bit higher as an option.
Any, Jay was next. He had his hand
up. Thank you. I always seem to be the person that asks a lot of questions and unfortunately sometimes seem to be the skeptic of things. So forgive me in advance. But one of the questions that I have about this, and it does tag on to Jim's question, which is how to really measure the efficacy of something like this in real world terms, not just, how many messages did we get out, how many people saw it, but did people download that information into their brains, and did that make any sort of difference? And I know that it's really, really difficult to be able to measure that. One way to measure it maybe is some sort of polling or something and asking people if they saw it, what impression that it had on them. I know that it's hard to do that, but I mean, if there's a public meeting or whatever, and you have a captive audience, it may be a place to maybe see if people actually saw these and actually, whether it made an impression on them. I would also agree that I'm not loving the messaging, but I'm kind of coming at it from another standpoint, which is I prefer messages and safety messages that are very targeted, that are less general in the sense of everybody says, hey, slow down or whatever. We've seen those signs a million times, and do people even pay attention to them anymore? If there's a way to, not only with the yard sign, but also the other messaging that the city has, to specifically target a particular problem out there. And I'll just give you two examples. They may or may not be ones you want to do, but I just want to give you an example of what I'm talking about. So for example, the multiple threat situation. For those people who don't know, it's, a car stops in one lane and then, somebody crosses in front of that car, and then a car in another lane hits them because the pedestrian, the pedestrian was maybe hidden by the other car. So the driver made a mistake, the pedestrian going in front of that car, in terms of being safe, responsible for your own safety, instead of just assuming that the car is going to stop and take a look before you step into the next lane of traffic. Those types of messages. Same thing with, say, bicyclists and dooring a bicyclist, to remind people that, if you're going to open your car door after you park and, there might be a bicyclist on the road, and just to keep reminding people to take a look before they open their car door. That's another, those are very specific targeted messages of a safety problem to get that people can actually, by changing their behavior, not their overall behavior, but a very specific behavior, could improve safety in that regard. So that's an example that I wanted to bring up. The other thing that I wanted to mention was I'm a little concerned about yard signs just in general, just because of sort of overloading people with messages. We're telling people in the message, hey, watch the road, and yet we're taking their eyes and bringing their attention to a sign on the side of the road instead of watching the road. I'd really hate for somebody to be looking at that sign and trying to read it and see what it says on it, and then miss the kid playing in the street or something like that. So, the overload of visual information, the overload of cluttering, actually distracting people with these signs is a concern of mine. I don't know how much data there is as to how much of a concern that is, but it is a concern that I thought of. As you have a message on the sign that says watch the road, and it's a sign that's telling people draw your attention off the road to do that. So that's something of concern for me. And then I'm also a little question about the use of public funds for this without having a really good tracking of what the success of something like this is. And I noted that at least one of the programs that you mentioned, and it might have been more than one, a nonprofit was funding this. And I don't know if there are nonprofits in the area that might be interested in doing something like this instead of public funds going to this, and then having those public funds for very specific targeted things. That $30,000 what could we do with that $30,000 that actually makes a huge difference, in a particular location or something like that. I just looking at the numbers, and I think I calculated this based on what you said. It looks like this $30,000 is just under 10% of that budget. So that's not an insignificant amount in terms of that $350,000 that was that grant. So those are my comments. I'm happy to get any response about any of those.
Thank you, Jay. I'm impressed that you used efficacy in your comments. And you work for a nonprofit involved in motors. Maybe you'd be thinking of making a contribution.
Yeah.
Well, if we had any money, we would.
That's why he's a nonprofit.
Any other comments? Dan? Go ahead. Jim,
Yeah,
and then
this
sure.
is maybe out of the scope for the subject here, but it falls under educational outreach, and I think that that's a critical thing to do. I looked on the city's site today to see if there's anything going on with this, and I don't see that. I don't know if the schools in their districts might have something going on, but if we don't, we should have a program. And I know we're talking probably a lot more money, but a team of people that go out to the schools, the elementary schools, the junior highs, to have meetings directly with the students, to teach them how to be defensive in what they're doing. Of course, we want the drivers to be doing everything they can to prevent accidents with pedestrians, bicyclists, and other motorists. But defensive driving, which is taught in many corporations, is all about the driver preventing not only the accident they might cause, but preventing the accident the other driver might cause. The same type of defensive skills should be taught to pedestrians and to bicyclists, especially the children who are very impressionable and the ones whose behavior is not always the best when it comes to that. One of the things that sticks with me back in the 1960s, when I was in elementary school, yes, I am that old, we had a program like that. I remember being out on the playground, a lady in a car, a simulated crosswalk with one of the students in there. And I learned that there are things called blind spots in cars, where the lady who is in the driver's seat says, I cannot see that child right now. And that it's enough that it's had an impact on me from that day that I'm remembering that to this day. I think that could be a very effective tool for the city to use.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Can I piggyback on that really quick? This is Dan.
Oh, go ahead, Dan.
I just wanted to piggyback on what he said really quick. Going out to the schools is a great suggestion. I would even suggest maybe a team that goes out to the village planning committees to educate the commissioners and members of the public about what Vision Zero is, and getting educating them through that avenue as well. That was my thought.
Thank you, Dan. All right, Joe, we're going to get to you now, and then I think that was the last hand I saw.
Okay.
Got another hand just popped.
Mr. Chairman, I'm an alumnus of Reister, and they do great work, particularly since I left. And we used to dread when folks would ask a committee for their input on creative. So God bless you for even asking us. And so, I want to go back first of all to the before we got to the signs. There was a comment made that we're going to refresh the videos. I don't know what, you didn't elaborate on that, and you don't really need to, but there's two aspects of a campaign. There's the creative, and then there's the placement. And the more you spend on creative, the less you spend on placement. So I would hope that you take a second look at that. Is the creative that you have sufficient enough? And I would say it is, because you start to develop new stuff with the limited budget you have, you're not making, you're not getting the penetration. Now you're introducing a message or a new creative, asset. So, I'm looking around the room to see who was around here 25, 30 years ago. And one of Reister's most effective campaigns, in fact, it really put it on the map. And Tim Reister to this day talks about it, and deservedly so, was the teeth staining, tooth smelly puking habit. Yeah. So what they did, Mr. Chairman, was they took the habit of smoking, and instead of saying it's bad for you, they made it outrageous. And I really think that's where we are. You know, the standard slow down, you know, campaign, you know, it's obviously having limited impact. And I would suggest that we all take a hard look at what can, especially with the limited budget that exists, what can we do that really, you know, elevates the issue to the point where earned media is generated, because look at this new campaign that Phoenix has launched. And I don't have any suggestions. That's good news. But I would think about it, because I just simply think that the standard same old has limited impact. I don't know what the timeline is for this. Maybe I do have one question. Maybe you can answer right up front. When did these yard signs go out?
We came to you first before we wanted to put a schedule out. If you all chose one of these, we could make it as soon as March 1st. We could get a couple hundred signs out. But
I would just suggest to you, and you may not be happy to hear this, you might as well wait till November, because all those yard signs are going to be competing with political signs that are going up now for the primary and then the general election in November. I also think there's something to be said about fewer words, especially on a yard sign. Slow down. If that's the direction you go in, that's the way to go. I mean, there's a reason why political candidates don't put their platform on a yard sign. You know, if you're going to make an impression, it's going to have to be like that. And it's just something to think about. But again, Mr. Chairman, I just want to reiterate, you know, I think it's time for something bold, outrageous, you know, maybe shocking. There's a reason why construction sites have a sign up that says we haven't had an accident in 52 days. Sadly, there's a reason why memorials are placed on our streets where firefighters and police officers have died in the line of duty. I really think it requires some kind of approach like that. And again, I don't have any suggestions, but there are people out there a lot smarter than me that probably do.
Joe, on your comment, you don't push a platform on there. And I think one of the things is the more words you have, the smaller the letters are going to be, and the more difficult they're going to be for anybody to read them in. I mean, I couldn't read a couple of those signs if they were in the back of the room. I could read slow down, you know.
Just real quick. Completely agree, Joe, on that. I think there's room to get punchy. That was kind of what I'm going through. I think that, you know, it doesn't need to be this. This is maybe Seattle. They're slow to flock down. Like, that gets a conversation going. You know, that is a little bit edgier, a little bit punchier. It gets to kind of. I'm not saying that's what we have to do necessarily, but I like it better. And about, you know, how do we? There's some, you know, questions or comments about how do we measure this. I mean, to me, in my mind, we're here for Vision Zero. Everything is measured against that. Have we reached zero yet in terms of deaths and serious injuries? We haven't yet. So all of this, everything we're doing, and, you know, I believe in is it 5 or 6 E's now? I can't remember, but I know education's one of them. And I think this is an important component of that. And just as a neighborhood association president, you know, I think this is, as long as we give people something that's kind of exciting and maybe edgy, people are going to want these in their yards, and it sparks that conversation and allows a place for that conversation in these neighborhood meetings and these school meetings. And I think it will have an impact, and it's not the silver bullet, but I think it's important. It's that education of it, and I think we can really have an impact here. So thank you.
Good, Jay. But we're going to start limiting comments to one time per item, okay? Rather than we're going to have a hashing around all night. But go ahead, Jay.
Well, I just had a suggestion. Slow down for puppies.
Speed up for cats.
Speed up for cats. Yeah, I didn't want to say that part of it, but everybody likes puppies, right? So anyway.
Just a procedural question, Mr. Chair. I know this is an action item, and I would like to, you know, I think move this forward, because I think this is important. What's the best? I don't know how much into the nitty gritty I should get in terms of a motion here. I think you've got a lot of good feedback. I think a fair amount of consensus here. Should I do just moving to move forward with the Vision Zero awareness campaign, or would you like a motion to have some more detail on it?
So Chair Callow, Vice Chair Hermes, I think this discussion was really, really great. I think the action that we were definitely looking for tonight was, do you guys support the use of spending of the 30,000 to move forward with the pilot program? I think what we heard loud and clear was we want to see some new messaging. Obviously, the Scan the Street for Wheels and Feet was an old campaign. We definitely want to make sure we have that Vision Zero branding on it. And so I think at this time, if you guys make a motion and you guys are in agreement to move forward with the pilot, what we will do as staff is go back, work with our partners to maybe come up with some additional messaging that we can then bring back to you guys. I would also encourage you, if you guys have you know, some potential slogans that you want to email Laura that we could consider as well. And we can come back at a future meeting with some potential updates on that and finalize exactly what that we want the messaging on the signs to be.
Thank you, Brianna. I think we can do that.
I move, thank you so much. That was very well summarized. I move to approve the moving forward with the Vision Zero awareness campaign.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Oh, you know what? I forgot to call. Is there anyone that wanted to speak on this item from the public? I think we should probably. I have no names. No one is. No one has to put their name in. I just wanted to make sure I wasn't overlooking something. So I haven't heard anybody. Okay, so with that stands. We'll move on to item 5, multi-jurisdictional signalized intersections. Joe, this item is just for you. Finally got he's been hammering us on since day one. So, Carl, take it over.
Members of the committee and, oh, hold on. The presentation may take just a minute. So, Chair Cowell, members of the committee, I'm Carl Langford, one of the traffic engineering supervisors, and presenting today just a little bit about multi-jurisdictional intersections. You guys received a packet of, sorry, is that better? Okay. So there was a packet presented to you guys beforehand. If you reviewed that, this is really just a very quick overview of it. To basically explain what multi-jurisdictional intersections are and why they kind of mattered at the time. Okay, so multi-jurisdictional intersections, they're locations where traffic signal is located and the traffic signal is in part one jurisdiction and part another jurisdictions. Okay, we'll pause for technical difficulties. Okay, so as I was explaining, multi-jurisdictional intersections where a traffic signal exists inside one city and also inside another. Oftentimes city boundaries are along city streets and whatnot. So you could look at 43rd Avenue, for example. That's one of the places that Glendale matches up to Phoenix. And so along there are multi-jurisdictional intersections in that City of Phoenix owns, or we operate and maintain that traffic signal, and yet some of it lives inside Glendale as well. The other main ones that come into play is also when you get with ADOT or potentially some locations on the county where ADOT has many of the freeway systems throughout the city, and they're inside the city, and yet ADOT has that right-of-way aspect to it. So to get in a little bit more, and here's a zoom in. Well, here's a map of some of the locations. There's a couple just outside of this map as well. There are a total of 98 multi-jurisdictional intersections. So these are locations where a traffic signal that we operate and maintain, that we don't necessarily have the right of way for that whole place. We have a total of 1,185 signalized intersections throughout the city that we have today. And so if you look at the map, you can see all the dots represent multi-jurisdictional intersections. For the most part, they're in boundaries next to the other cities, and then also an ADOT right away as well. So ADOT is one of the unique ones. We generally operate and maintain the traffic signals that are, say, on the loops and the SRs, so SR 51, the loop 101 and whatnot. But generally speaking, ADOT has the interchanges, so I-17, I-10, whatnot. Loop 202 is a unique situation in that it was built with a design build concept. And so there is a design builder that has a maintenance agreement for 30 some odd years. And so they remain in ADOT control at this time. So, and the reason this matters is initially a couple of months ago, we came to you guys with some intersections and some segments in there, and we said that we took out the multi-jurisdictional intersections. And the reason for that is because any work that would take place there required an IGA or an intergovernmental agreement, and those things tend to take longer. And when we first started our road safety action plan, we had a fair amount of funding in the first year that had to be used up fairly quick. And so any projects that were associated with those couldn't really spend the time that a project would need based on that intergovernmental agreement requirement and other such things and compromises and agreements and, okay, can we do this here and you do this here type item. And so for that reason, that's why that was put in. At this given time, we have passed kind of that quick early funding. Our funding has more time to it. So we are evaluating all the intersections that we operate and maintain in Phoenix for potential projects in that regard. So, and that's basically what I have to say on that. And we will go to any questions from the committee.
Go. Turn your mic on.
I took an effort to do this, and I appreciate it. I just think it gives us potentially gives us a skewed impression of, our rate of accidents and fatalities if they're technically in the city of Phoenix, but yet they're not counted for whatever reason because of how they're managed, whose responsibilities it is. But it's very useful. So thank you.
Excellent.
Any other questions or comments? Yes, sir, Jay.
Just a couple of questions about to clarify some things. Kind of based on what Joe just said, are you saying that you've taken out the data on collisions and fatalities? That's why I just wanted to clarify that for just, I do have another question, but.
So no. So all we did is we took out the multi-jurisdictional from consideration for projects. So we collect the collision data, fatal, serious, and everything, all of the intersections throughout. We've recently gone through an episode in updating that data and how we access that data, and specifically made sure to actually go into the adjacent jurisdiction, because ADOT is the one that provides all that data at a signalized intersection, make sure that we're collecting, say, 150 feet inside Glendale at one of our intersections.
Okay, so just to follow up on that question, which is that are there intersections that would have qualified for a reason, let's say a high injury intersection or something like that, that at least in the initial round, you said, oh, we'd like to do something here, but we can't because, we don't have time to get the multi-jurisdictional approval, or did you just not look at the data yet for a project? I'm just trying to clarify exactly what the approach was.
Yes. So on those, what we did is we basically just said, hey, we're not going to do any projects on those. We haven't really evaluated the data. So as we move forward, our HIN, our high injury network, does have quite a few locations that are kind of on the border. 43rd Avenue is an example that tends to be one of the corridors that has a fair amount of stuff that's shared with Glendale. And so we will be moving forward looking for projects in those type of places.
Okay, so that would be my, just a request for the future in feedback, which would be that that when you're it would be nice to see if you came back to us at some time in the future, whenever it's appropriate, to say, hey, this is an intersection where we would like to, where we think there's a safety issue that we would like to address, but it's, you know, it's in this multi-jurisdictional location, just so we kind of get a sense of how many of those fall into that category.
Okay, we can do that.
Any other questions? I do not have any names submitted. Is there anyone from the public that would like to make a comment? No? Okay. This item was for information only. Is that correct? All right. Let's move on to the next item then. We'll go to item 6 is discussion of the 24 Safe Streets grant submission.
I will be covering for Reed today. Wait just a minute as we get technical items sorted out. Okay. Chair Callow, members of the committee. So today we'd like to make a presentation about the 2024 Safe Streets for All program. And really this is about a safety grant that is available for the U.S. government. And we'll explain more as we go along today. Okay. So the Safe Streets for All program is a federal DOT program that's been recently put together. The bipartisan infrastructure law established the Safe Streets for Roads, Safe Streets in All. SS4A is oftentimes what we call that. A discretionary program with $5 billion in appropriated funds over 5 years. So as far as a grant for road construction and specifically for safety type items, this was a very large grant opportunity that came available recently. And this grant opportunity is available for regional funds, local jurisdictions, tribal initiatives, state funds. So it is something that is oftentimes these large grants tend to be at the state DOT level. This is one the federal government basically said, hey, cities are where we're having more of this problem. We want to make sure cities, local agencies and whatnot can have access to this as well. So the purpose of the SS4A grant is to improve roadway safety by significantly reducing or eliminating roadway fatalities and serious injuries through safety action plan development and refinement and implementation focused on all users, including pedestrians, bicyclists, public transportation users, motorists, personal conveyance, and micromobility users, and commercial vehicle operators. So that's kind of just the overall aspect. There's this large grant available, and they've had a grant in 2022 is when it first came out. We did apply to that grant in 2022. We created a project called Reversing the Trend, Creating Safer and Equitable Streets. So this was right as we finished up our road safety action plan and got it approved through council. That was one of the requirements to qualify for this grant. In the grant, we kind of did what some might call maybe a shotgun approach. We took our HIN network, took a lot of our highest locations on our HIN, our high injury network, and said, hey, we're going to improve 7 intersections. We've got 7 mid-block crossings that we're going to improve. And we had 2.5 miles of corridor safety projects throughout. We also said, hey, we're going to do some education components similar to what you'd heard earlier today. And we also said, hey, we'd like some additional evaluation planning to look at a speed evaluation study and a pedestrian high risk analysis. Unfortunately, we did not get the bulk of this grant. It was nearly a $30 million grant that we applied to. They gave us a little less than $500,000 for kind of the evaluation portion. And we're starting to move forward on that we did receive. 2023, we applied for a grant called Re-envisioning Indian School Road. So one of the things we noted in 2022, a lot of the implementation grants, so they're the grants that build or change the infrastructure of the roadway, we saw that they generally were corridor type projects. And so we said, hey, let's look at one of our highest corridors on our HIN and put together a package for that. And so this is the grant that we did recently receive. We told you this last time, so you've heard a little bit about this grant, but we did receive $25 million from federal funding for this. It focuses on Indian School Road from 91st Avenue to 39th Avenue, and funds will look to really improve that roadway. Sidewalks, pedestrian crossing areas, crossing area improvements. We're looking to add more crossings throughout the corridor, additional lighting and whatnot. We recently did have one of our first meetings with FHWA receiving this grant, and okay, what are the steps moving forward? And the person presenting commented very highly on our proposal and whatnot, that, hey, this is a proposal that's going to change lives, going to affect how many people are potentially being killed on our roadways. So now in 2024, there is another grant coming available. So the notice for funding opportunity is anticipated to open in February. So this month, the federal government hasn't sent it out yet. For implementation grants, the U.S. Department of Transportation expects to award a minimum of $2.5 million. So if you have a project, that's on the low end, and up to $25 million is potentially the award for these. We looked at last year's grant, so the 2023, to kind of say, hey, is the corridor the right way to keep going? Interesting enough, in 2022, it seemed corridor was very much everything. Looking at the 2023, they were roughly half corridor and half looking at, the city or jurisdiction took their HIN and said, hey, here's our top 3 corridors. Here's our top 5 signal intersection locations and some corridors. So it was kind of a mix, much more so than the first grant opportunity was. So what we'll do is we'll go over very quickly with you guys. These are the requirements that were in the 2023 grant. The requirements haven't exactly come out yet for 2024. We're anticipating them this month. We anticipate they're going to be very similar. They didn't change much from 2022 to 2023 as well. So we can see here there's 5 main criteria that they look at. First is safety, and because that's really what this grant is. The DOT wants this to be, it's basically Vision Zero grant for the federal highways. They just don't call it that. So safety is the #1 thing. They're looking very highly at equity, engagement, collaboration, effective practices and strategies, other DOT strategic goals, and I'll go into detail what those are, and then supplemental planning demonstration activities. So as far as the selection criteria for safety impact, they're really looking at the fatal and serious injuries is what they want to see. They basically want to see your plan, and most plans have a high injury network similar to our network. So they really want to see, hey, where is that high injury network? Are you doing projects that's on that high injury network? The other thing they really want to see is low cost, high impact strategies. They're not looking for that Taj Mahal redoing the complete roadway, but hey, what are some, people say low hanging fruit or lower cost applications that could be used? So selection criteria 2 is equity, engagement, and collaboration. So this here, they're really wanting it to be something that serves all the communities. One of the big things they look at is there's actually a U.S. Census tract of undeserved communities that's identified. Phoenix does fit in a fair amount of those. I'll show a map here in a bit. But basically, undeserved communities are places where there's more children, there's more seniors or Blacks or Latinos, Indigenous, Native, Asian Americans, Pacific Islanders. You're looking for diversity in many ways or places. Another thing that looks at it quite a bit is there's a percentage called zero car households. So people that don't have a car and their modes of transportation has to be other than a car. So selection criteria 3 is effective practices and strategies. So this is really looking at what strategies and policies do you have as a city. It looks at similar policies to our complete street policy that we have, and it's looking for improved multimodal networks. So it's kind of saying, hey, is your project for all the road users? Is it for pedestrians, bicyclists, public transportation, people with disabilities? They have a term in there with PROAG, or I don't recall what that means right at the moment. Public right-of-way accessibility guidelines. So they're the requirements for ADA or disabled people along the road. Are you doing things that are improving for all of them? Are you also taking care of the motorists? What is that doing? And then criteria number 4 looks specifically at other strategies and goals. So one of the things here that it points to is its focus. It says here, the program's focus on equity and safety is also advanced in considerations of how applications address climate and sustainability considerations, as well as whether applications support economic competitiveness. The US DOT will assess to the extent their projects and strategies use safety strategies to support the department strategic goals of climate change, sustainability, workforce, and economic competitiveness. So those are some big, large US DOT goals. They want to say, hey, are your projects meeting those type of goals as well? So, and then criteria number 5 is really supplemental planning and demonstration activities. So this one here is really, so the grants are available for implementation grants and also for supplemental planning and or demonstration projects. You can submit ultimately for both, so that's similar to what we did in our first year in 2022. This is really looking at, hey, do you have any of those? They don't count as necessarily higher if you do or don't. It's more another category in one sense, saying, hey, do you need some additional planning or things of that nature? Okay. So as I stated, so the 2024 grant is coming up. It hasn't been released officially yet. There will be a couple of months for us to put together a package. And so what we want to do is we plan to apply for that grant and hopefully get awarded something from the grant. And so at this time, we're really looking for the Community Advisory Committee, for you guys to help guide us, not necessarily tell us exactly what to do. Our next steps is really figure out what is the grant. We'll meet internally. We'll probably hire a consultant on this to kind of evaluate where is the best locations. We talked to some people to say, what does the federal government want? Do we know well what projects are going to be competitive and whatnot? But what we're looking for you guys is at least some guidance, some things that you guys would like. So things to consider is corridor style projects versus multiple locations. We had 2 different types of projects that we submitted so far. Kind of a general type of project, if you're in something specific in that regard. And then the last item is any specific locations. And so to help us with that, you all received a larger map. So that's a full map. I've got kind of a blown up section here on the screen specifically. So this map, just to point out, so this map has our high injury network segments, so our HIN segments. And so our segments are sections of the roadway. So they're in the green line that you can see. Our high injury network intersections specifically are the red dots. And then the other thing that's on here, so in our road safety action plan, we developed an equity analysis in our component with that, because equity is one of the big things, especially the federal government is looking at. And so we looked at a couple of different parameters and said, hey, where is an equity, where is our equity map for Phoenix specifically? And then underlying there is actually the US DOT undeserved community as well. So that's in kind of the hashed marks in that regard. And you can see kind of a blow up of kind of the center of the city as well on the screen. So at this time, that's my presentation. We'd like to open up to the committee for any discussion or comments.
Good. Yeah. Carl, thank you so much for the presentation and for stepping in for reading and doing this. Just a couple questions about the past, make sure I understand the facts, and then I do have a few comments about what you're soliciting some feedback for. The one for Indian School that we submitted, and got, was that 2022 cycle grant? Am I getting that year right?
That was 2023.
2023. Okay, thank you for clarifying that. And then on one of the slides it mentioned pedestrian areas and crossing improvements. Could you elaborate on what's a pedestrian area, and then what would a crossing improvement look like?
I'd have to double check the grant specifically, but one of the things that we looked at was specifically having pedestrian crossings, safe pedestrian crossings at a frequency for the road that would be acceptable. I can't recall exactly what that frequency is at the moment, but it was to look to say, hey, we need to add more pedestrian crossings because there's not enough for the amount of pedestrians on that roadway.
And then to get to your question or what you're soliciting feedback on, which I really appreciate, I would say I would love to see the Indian School continued. I think that Indian School grant that we got right now, which is great, that part is super dangerous, is west of Grand Avenue. Would love to see us look at Indian School now east of Grand Avenue, which is also, as you can see, a lot of red dots, a lot of green. This is around where I live. It is very unsafe there on Indian School. We have one of our schools there on Indian School, Longview, and there's a lot of upgrades, especially that crossings that need to be done there. So I would recommend that area. The other one, it would be, which just jumps out at me on a map, is at 43rd Avenue area between Indian School and is it maybe McDowell-ish area? You can see just a lot of high injury network deaths and serious injuries there in that area as well. Those are kind of the two areas. I like the idea of segments. You get a good, hopefully bang for your buck, and hopefully to try to make those areas a lot safer. In terms of, I think having more mid-block crossings is really important. Also really safe ones that have, I don't know, I'm sure there's a name for them, but kind of that respite area in the middle. I don't know what you call that, island, or I see that in a few areas, and especially on Indian School, which is a really dangerous road right now.
That's a refuge island.
Yeah, refuge island. Thank you. Refuge island. Pedestrian place. Yeah, signage, all of that. I think seeing that on Indian School and much better sidewalks and places for people to ride their bikes. It is an area where people a lot of times can't afford a car, don't own cars. I need to are on foot out of necessity, and so would love to see those areas improved.
There's the feedback.
Okay, thank you. Just a couple of questions and then some comments. One of the slides said something that said speed evaluation, but also in the next breath you said that you didn't get all the funding. So I didn't know if that was something that was done or you didn't have the funding for it, and if it was something that was done, what exactly was that speed evaluation? What was that?
Yep. So that is a portion of the grant that we did get award for, and we did get awarded.
Okay, and then what happened with that?
What we asked for was really a speed evaluation, kind of how do we set our policy for setting speed in Phoenix. Phoenix is a fairly unique city compared to, say, New York or compared to Los Angeles and whatnot. And so we were looking to just be able to hire an expert to really help us say, how do we best set our speed policy for Phoenix directly?
Is that something that's available? Has that been done?
I don't know directly that. There are similar type studies and things that have been done. We might be asking somewhat a newer thing than others. Right now in the engineering community and whatnot, you can ask a lot of different people and there's varied opinions on how best to set speed limits.
Yeah, because we've been doing it, yes, there are engineering principles, and I'm just not quite sure whether that reinvents the wheel in some way that, but if there, so I guess my question is just to get because I want to move on to another question. Was this evaluation done? Are we in the middle of it? Where is it? And
so
what's the result?
We did get funding for the evaluation. We are in the beginning portion where we're seeking to have a consultant hired here in the next couple of months.
I got you. Okay, thank you. So a couple of things. In the interest of the request for high impact, low cost things, I want to tag on to some things that other people said here, which is safer places for people to cross the street. I did a study in a number of different cities. Phoenix, unfortunately, not one of them because it's very hard to get the data here. But other places like Los Angeles and California have data that's much more readily available online, and we found that somewhere in the realm of like 20 to 30% of pedestrian fatalities has to do with crossing the street. And so safer places, whether it's lighting or whether it's a flashing beacon, which is less expensive than, say, a traffic signal or whatever, having safer places for people to cross the street and in enough distance apart less of a distance apart from each other, that people are likely to use them and not try to cross places where there isn't a safer place for them to cross the street, can be a very high impact. Because if you want to, if you want to have a result on pedestrian safety and pedestrian fatalities, if that's where they're all, happening, which is crossing the street, then we should be highly focused on crossing the street and making that safer, safer places for that. And then just a word of caution, which is that in doing some of these projects, we have to be careful that we're not doing something that may make that area safer, but then pushes the traffic somewhere else, and then you're just basically chasing your tail all over the city, because now, I don't want to mention specific things, but if you do something and it pushes traffic elsewhere, you could have a problem. So I want to say that. The other thing, and this may get me into trouble here, and this is not a criticism of the city at all, this is just what's coming down from the federal government, but I do want to be on record of saying this, which is that it's really, it's great we're looking at areas where, which have not been highly invested in the past, but simply because I would hate to see us pass up other areas that have maybe a higher level of problem, just because it didn't fit into this quote unquote equity model or whatever. And so if you look at the map, you probably will see that there's a lot of overlap there in terms of where the safety problems are and where the underserved communities are. But I would also, say that shouldn't be the driving, the equity should not be the driving factor, although the federal government seems to be pushing that. I'd rather see the safety aspect and where the funds actually need to go to be higher up on the list of things. And that just goes to slide number or issue number 4 on the slides, which was, other goals or whatever. All those other goals may be great, but when you're doing traffic engineering and you're looking under it from a vision standpoint, which is we want to drive down fatalities, when you're trying to serve too many masters, you can get no result anywhere good. So let's try to keep focused on reducing traffic fatalities and not trying to serve all these other masters. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you for the input.
Carl, something that just jumps out to me looking at the map is the number of high accident locations on 19th Avenue. And I don't know what is unique about 19th Avenue that's causing that, but it's the only road here other than Indian School that just has every major street intersection pops up red. And could be Vime. It is one of the only ways around, first way around the mountain, when you're going north. But just as if you're looking for places to look, it looks like a pretty good place to look to me. There's a lot of candidates there, and they're probably all built pretty much the same. So once you get past the light rail, I would say. Got about that.
Mr. Chairman.
Anything else? Go.
Carl, the slide appears to be, I want to make sure we're looking at the entire city. Can you reduce it? Because
we have one of these.
Yep.
Unfortunately, I was going to say, it's like you're missing half the city there.
The map as well.
Well, now I have a map. I'll look.
This area does incorporate the highest majority, but there are a couple more further to the north.
Yeah, that's fine. I just wanted to make sure we weren't missing anything. Can you also go back a previous? I want to make sure I know what we're being asked to consider. Okay, right here. Yeah. Corridor style versus multiple locations.
We're looking more just input from the committee on, hey,
Okay.
is there a consensus
Understood.
we really should try to do corridor
right.
again? That's
Yeah.
the one that won, or do we do multiple locations?
All right. So the staff made the decision to do corridor when in the last grant
Correct.
to do Indian School. You're asking us for input. That's great, but I'm curious to know what staff's thoughts are.
Yeah. Our thoughts in general would probably be to stay with a corridor. Now,
Okay.
again, that's just the general aspect. What we will do is meet with some others. We do have some consultants that actually work in the federal government and whatnot, and they generally have the ear of what the feds kind of want. It's not always true. And so those are things that we look at as well.
Well, so I don't, are we being asked, Mr. Chairman, to weigh in on that tonight or?
My understanding, we're just giving
I
them.
mean, yeah, I mean,
feedback, and that's.
But until now, we weren't even, we're not asked. We're asked to choose
Yes.
either or, right? But you're not
Really,
you're not
you
asking
guys-
for consent on.
No,
Okay.
we're not asking for consent. You guys are an advisory committee. We're bringing this to you to help advise us to look at locations. We'll ultimately look and use our expertise to figure out what is the best, but we want to make sure that we're looking at anything. You guys live in the community, are there, maybe there's things that you guys are aware of or see that we may not be aware of.
Well,
It's for discussion.
okay, well, no, I get it, but I'm just kind of curious. I'll just ask the question up front. Give me your best case. Why corridor versus multiple locations?
So I'll say corridor, I think we have our city is somewhat unique and we do have quite a few corridors, if you look on the map, that do line up. A corridor allows the segment in general to have an overall feel to it that hopefully improves the overall of the whole road, and so you get drivers used to that more so. When you do maybe spots, it might improve certain spots, but maybe the improvement doesn't last very long or it's not noticed. And again, there's no right or wrong answer. Our goal is to get awarded the grant.
Jaime?
I like the idea at the 19th Avenue segment because we have the I-17 right there. And I know with the highway construction, we are constantly getting traffic pushed down the 19th. So I wonder if there's something we can do there. Really look at what the effects of the I-17 right there being pushed on.
Wait a minute, Abby had a comment on.
If you're looking for types of projects, I know low cost ones that are really important. I know I sound like a broken record because I swear I say this every meeting, but pedestrian leading intervals, we've been talking about that as getting on as a future agenda item, and narrowing the roads, because those are both low cost proven techniques that save people's lives. And that's an important type of project we should be considering.
For the input.
Just on that, agree with that, and lane width, I think at least that was what I heard. The actual, not necessarily, although, don't take anything off the board, not necessarily reducing a lane, but lane width and how that can really make things safer. But
You mean bigger or smaller?
Smaller, narrower. Studies have shown that
Just
narrower.
based on my own experience, we are pushing the envelope where it is right now. Most of our lanes are 10-foot lanes, and when we initially striped 10-foot lanes, we couldn't stripe the project until after we got federal approval because they would not approve 10-foot lanes.
I think the science is really evolving over that. And I just read a brand new study that came out that talked about this topic out. I know I can't send it to everybody because of open meeting laws, but I will send it to our staff and just take a read because I thought it was really fascinating. But that wasn't, my comment actually was about, just to be clear, maybe I already said this, but corridors, like the idea of corridors, like the idea of Indian school, especially, although there's a few that are good, but Indian school, because it get that long, now we're talking about this long, lengthy corridor that people are driving, because we got both sides of Grand Avenue there. Which brought up earlier about kind of equity in this. I really appreciate the equity lens because there are, those are low income areas or areas where people don't own cars oftentimes, more often, frankly. And also historically, those are areas that have been underserved and under-resourced. There's other reasons why, in the Arcadia area, luckily it is not on here very much. Go down 40th Street. It's a beautiful street. It's got really nice investment down there in Arcadia. You won't really see much action here on the high injury network because of those investments. On the flip side, in the avenues, we haven't gotten that level of investment. So I do appreciate the equity lens that are kind of called to look at here. So thank you.
Any other comments?
Yes, I've got a couple. I'm curious to know what the HIN network looks like south of the river, in South Phoenix and Levine, and Ahwatukee for that matter. It seems like those three areas are largely left out of a lot of the conversation. And I continuously see it left out on maps like this. And I also had a question as to how updated is the HIN network the data? Is that go up to 2020 or does it include any of the 2022 data? But for my stance on it, I'd like to, there's a growing trend nationwide of cities that are adopting citywide reductions in speed limits to 20 or 25 miles an hour on, local and collector streets, to make the road safer for everybody. And when, we all know that when speeds are lower, people are driving lower, and that, the severity of injuries increases exponentially the faster someone's going. So I'd like to see some, a whole, like a system-wide, citywide approach, maybe rather than, in addition, if there's, a way to do it, for a corridor, or whatever we decide as a committee to recommend, but something like that. And then in particular out here, I know we've got where I live, for example, my subdivision is surrounded, I've got 5 schools on 3 boundaries, on 3 property lines. Got Cesar Chavez High School, got Heritage School, Legacy, Levine, got 2 of the Levine Elementary School District schools. And when they've got pickup and drop off 2 times a day, it's a nightmare. And nobody, for the kids that do walk, they go either before or after all the traffic, because it's just packed with cars, and you see them doing every kind of road maneuver you would normally get a ticket for. And this is with off-duty police being contracted by some of these schools to watch this area. And so I think making sure that so this involves people parking in the bike lanes. Their cars just sticking out into the general travel lanes. Today, in fact, I saw 2 cars facing each other because someone's car's battery died while they were sitting in a no parking zone, and so they both had their doors open, impeding traffic. So there's just a lot of things that, yes, there's we want to raise awareness and make it safer for everybody, but it also comes down to an education campaign for people who are driving. It comes down to an education campaign for people, for our schools and the parents that drive their kids to school. Ultimately, the culture of driving in Phoenix is deteriorated, in my opinion, over the years, and it's less safe every year. And you see people going faster and faster, disregarding more rules of the road, and they know that they can get away with this because there's a lack of.
Dan, can I interrupt you there?
Go ahead.
And let's try and stay focused on the grant application. I know there's
I apologize.
a lot of
right.
issues we could.
I'm sorry, I was getting a little behind myself. But yeah, so I just like to see if we can focus on maybe a system-wide approach for speed limit reductions, and then making our areas around school or within a certain distance from schools safer for kids to get there to and from, and also raising that awareness for drivers in those areas as well.
Thank you, Dan. Okay, Jay, go ahead. This is your last one, though.
Not my last one. Come on, ever. I just have to say this because, with all due respect to my colleague, this approach to reducing speed limits that we're going to actually have people go slower does not work. It never has worked. They've done this in many cities around the country. Portland did a 20 is plenty. The results of that was that speeds did not change. Same thing with Boston, same thing, a number of other cities, okay? Simply changing the speed limit without changing the built environment does not make a difference. All you're doing is lowering the bar to enforcement. And when you're talking about equity, which a lot of people here obviously are concerned about, then you now have a problem with equity in a lot of areas of the city, because now you're lowering the bar to enforcement. And so I just really feel like I have to speak up every time this lowering speed limits is brought up. Speed limits have to be tagged towards what the way the roadway is built And if you don't like the speeds that people are traveling on the roads, I'm not talking about the people that are exceeding that by a large amount, but if you don't like the average speeds, the natural speed that occurs on that roadway, then that's a question of the roadway, the way the road is built. It is not a question of the number on the sign. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'd like
Now,
to,
again,
I'd like to add to that.
Can we stay focused on the grant application? I know that was an editorial there.
Well, speed limits can fall into, part of the action
That
plan.
they
for
can,
the-
it's
the
just,
grants and
all right,
that.
go ahead.
I just wanted to piggyback on what Jay said. I gotta say, I was very disappointed with the last speed limit changes that were implemented. And the 85th percentile has been a standard that's been used. I know the MUTCD has changed and there's been some changes in looking at that. But the last changes, I don't see any engineering whatsoever that went into those changes. And they were reduced significantly below the 85th and in fact below the 50th. So I've got some real concerns with the way we're dealing with speed limits in this city in general. Sorry if that's off topic.
Anybody else? Not anything on topic, right? Well, you can wait till request for future agenda items then. But that was for an information discussion only. We did not have anyone registered to speak on that item. So no more discussion. We will move on to request for future agenda items. Ed.
Can't hear you.
I would like to see social media being, I would like to see social media be used for Vision Zero for like the awareness campaign. I think yard signs are nice, but it's not really that much of a wide impact compared to say social media. So I'd like to see that.
Ed.
A great comment. I'm showing my age talking a lot about yard signs. So I think that's a great comment. But I have a few. One that was brought up, and I think I brought up before, pedestrian leading intervals. I know it was brought up already. Would love to see that as its own agenda item. Having that be a citywide initiative. But information item and possible action on pedestrian leading intervals. Another one would be, and just because I saw Tempe was just doing it, and they got some good press, I think, some sort of enforcement. Another one of the E's, an enforcement, week, day, month, what have you. Maybe day or week is probably better. Where we focus on something that's, hey, this is Vision Zero Red Light Enforcement Week. You get some earned media off of that. I know Tempe did a push, at least I saw on their social media, hey, we're focused on Vision Zero. We're doing red light enforcement this week, especially. Of course, there's always some enforcement that's happening, but some additional enforcement that really gets some earned media out there that reminds people. I think I was impressed by. Well, we all see crazy stuff out there. I won't regale stories. I heard Dan stories, but just it's important to remind people that enforcement is out there and it does happen, and for people to see that. Another thing, and I think Dan actually brought this up as a future agenda item last time, but I haven't seen it yet. Something that make it, I don't know, easier to have civilian reporting. Maybe a presentation of what that civilian reporting looks like now. We're out there, we're seeing things. Dan mentioned like, folks parked illegally, creating hazardous situations. What's the best way to report those things? And maybe we can look at our policies around that. Last one is, would love to look at traffic mitigation devices and policies. And look at those policies. I've had just a little bit of experience with those, and it seems like they could use a refresh. Right now, just for example, to get certain traffic mitigation devices, roundabouts, speed tables, you need in some cases 100% of property owners to sign off on it, even if it doesn't affect anybody's personal property at all. You need 100% of property owners within 100 feet of that traffic device. Creates a really high barrier, and I think unnecessarily high barrier to getting these traffic mitigation efforts, especially in lower income communities where there's a higher percentage of renters, because renters aren't consulted on those under current policy, just the property owners. oftentimes those owners are living in California, what have you, or out of state. And I think it's a good opportunity to look at those and see if we can do it. Last thing, I just because I'm a stickler on bylaws and such, I know my term as a vice chair is a 1-year term, and our bylaws we have to elect a new one at the next meeting. So just want to put that as a future. Probably it was already on there, but just wanted to. Okay, cool. Thank you.
I looked into that. Well, I'm going to be happy to pass the reins to someone. I had one question. This is more of just a, do you have a list of traffic signals that are on recall citywide?
I don't know that we have a list. We could probably generate something if you'd like.
If I don't want you to go to a lot of work or anything, but I just seem to be thinking I'm running into them everywhere, and I just, out of curiosity, would like to see if I'm dreaming this or if there's just a whole lot upward in the area where I live. So, if there, you could just email me this. This doesn't have to be anything formal or official. So, thank you.
Yeah.
Any other? Jay.
Yep. Go ahead, Jay.
I'll go. Thanks. Actually, these are just tagging on to 2 things that Ed was talking about. So you were talking about leading pedestrian intervals. If you could, if there is going to be a presentation on this, could you also give us a presentation? A part of that presentation be about possibly pedestrian exclusive intervals, like a scramble crossing or something like that, where that might be appropriate, because that's those also can be really helpful. So that way we separate cars and pedestrians in time, which is a good thing. Same thing with roundabouts that was mentioned. I know that there's been some places where I don't want to call them portable roundabouts, but they're not like a full built out thing, but it's maybe on a like a neighborhood street where it can break up the flow of traffic. I don't mean to slow people down, but I mean, you got stop signs there anyway or whatever, but it's a visual breakup, which is having this, having a smaller thing. And I can actually send something that they did in Los Angeles. The mistake they made in Los Angeles, they left the stop signs up, which defeats the whole purpose. But these things can be done relatively inexpensively with paint and flower pots and things like that. And makes the, and breaks up the visual, of a long distance. So just as part of roundabouts, but I'll send staff a copy of what they did there. And just a question, because open meeting laws were mentioned. Is there a restriction on us sending things to other members just for informational purposes? I didn't think that there was, and I just want to make sure that we can't have a discussion back and forth, but can we not?
Only if you're sending it just to me, Jay, which you can send me anything you want, then that's fine. But if you're sending it to the whole group, then that could be considered an open meeting law violation.
I'm not sure. I mean, can we whether you have that clarification now, or can we get a clarification on that? Because I mean, my understanding of open meeting laws in some places where I've served on committees of this type, that as long as you don't have a discussion of things, you can give people whatever information you want. So can we get a
Chairman Callow and Member Bieber, yes, you cannot send emails to the whole committee. If you do wish to get something out, you can send it to staff. And as part of staff disseminating a packet and backup information, they can disseminate that to the committee, but you can't have discussions about it. And that's just for open meeting law protection to make sure that there aren't inadvertent replies to things where people inadvertently hit reply all and do that. So the city just makes sure that all of that correspondence, if it's going to the full committee, goes through staff to then be sent out. And then staff puts a notice in there saying, please don't respond to this. That kind of thing.
So send to staff and they'll disseminate.
Correct.
That's the answer. Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. One other question, and this just has to do with our the minutes. I know we get the minutes right before the meeting. I don't know how long it takes staff to do that. I know it's a burdensome thing, but the closer that it comes to the actual meeting that we had, the easier it is to remember what happened. So rather than having to go back and try to look at something or whatever. So just a request that the sooner we can get it, the better, because our memories will fade quickly over time. Thanks.
Anyone else?
Yes. Go ahead.
Okay. So first off, I want to say thank you for getting out the agenda early. I think we got a couple days early before the meeting, so we appreciate that. Second, I just want to add my request on for the leading pedestrian intervals. We have two lights going in downtown on 3rd and 4th Street in McKinley, and that's an area that would be an excellent example of a leading pedestrian interval. There's a lot of foot traffic going to the farmers market, but I just want to make sure that's also just an agenda item.
Dan, did you have something?
Yeah, just wanted to come. Thank you. I wanted to. Ed had mentioned something I talked about before as a previous agenda item, and that was for citizen enforcement for hazardous obstructions in the roadways, specifically around school zones and stuff like that. I have some research I've done, and I'd be happy to send to staff. But I'd like to, I've been requesting that since the committee started having meetings last year. So I'd like to see that, on an agenda sometime soon. But then I also I support the pedestrian leading intervals. And then like I mentioned earlier, I'd like to see if we can do some type of educational campaign or outreach to the village planning committees, and I like somebody's idea. They wanted to see more active social media awareness going on. So those are the things I think we need to explore, because if we're not getting the message out and all we're doing is meeting, every few months, then we're not really accomplishing much. So making sure that we have the largest impact, because that's for the biggest bang for the buck, getting educational outreach to the community and other committees in the city would have a large impact, I think. So those are just my thoughts for tonight. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Anyone else? Okay, with that, we will have public comment. Does anyone, we have one person? What? Okay. Online, is it? Kristen? Okay, Kristen, where is Kristen? Is Kristen online?
Yes, hi, thanks very much. And I also want to second some of the other members of the committee. Thank you for getting the agenda out earlier. That was great. I would also love to see on future agenda items, looking at pedestrian leading intervals, speed and red light enforcement, some of the neighborhood traffic mitigation options, and the requirements and fees to get those in place. And then, of course, the chair and vice chair election at the next meeting. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Kristen. Okay, anyone else? We have no one else registered for public comment, so we're done hearing that. I'd like to make a motion to adjourn this meeting. So moved. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Run for the door.
Thank you, everyone.
We did it by 7 today, guys.